Continuing the idea a little bit further, let's remind ourselves that the chapter is offering two foundational principles: valuing nature and honoring humans. We looked at that a little bit. And two key strategies which we'll look at here: thinking consequentially and integrating solutions. And then we'll look at two interrelated tactics: restraint and law. So the first key strategy is thinking consequentially, short term and long term. Okay, so among that, one of the first ideas is the so-called precautionary principle. It basically means, in the context of the environment, we are not sure always about the details of the chain of events or the cascades of the consequences of our own actions. Let's say increasing greenhouse gas is measurable very precisely and accurately, especially for carbon dioxide, because it's a well-mixed gas and it has a long residence time. So if you measure it in a few spots, you get a very good sense of the global concentrations, and we have been tracking it very well. Everything from that: increase in temperature, not uniform; increase in humidity, not uniform; sea level rise, depends on the dynamics, not uniform; glacier melt, pretty bad in the sea ice loss in the Arctic and glacier melt in Greenland, but Antarctica is a bit more complicated, where ocean warming, southern ocean warming, can make some glaciers grow because warm ocean provides more moisture for snowfall and so on. So essentially, everything after the greenhouse gas increase becomes, let's say, little bit more complicated. But do we need to debate it, or do we take the precautionary principle and say, let's reduce the fossil fuel emissions? How do you do that? So you can look at movements that have started, like Keep It in the Ground movement, which basically says over 400 organizations call on worldwide leaders to end new fossil fuel development. Again, I should remind ourselves that unless there is a very effective alternative which people can immediately switch to, it's not easy to end the fossil fuel dependence, especially if you're a parent worried about your children and their future, sending them to school. You cannot worry about the food miles, driving, and so on from morning till evening. Willpower is a limited resource. So decarbonization of the system has to happen, but that's where the short term and the long term thinking comes into a very great critical importance, that you cannot implement precautionary principle unless we move steadily at short term and long term to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The other one to worry about in this strategy of thinking consequentially at short term and long term is the unintended consequences. Anything you do in a hurry can have, or even without a hurry, can have unintended consequences. Remember the story of CFCs and HFCs. It was very clear that CFCs, the refrigerants of the day, were creating problems for the ozone and were responsible for the ozone hole. HFCs seemed like a silver bullet solution. Montreal Protocol, HFCs came into effect, but HFCs are now a very strong greenhouse gas contributors to greenhouse gas warming. Okay, so that's not what we want. Plus, there are other ideas like geoengineering, where you go and sprinkle some reflective dust in the stratosphere to get rid of the solar energy before it gets into the atmosphere. Obviously, it doesn't reduce CO2, but it reduces the total energy and hence can reduce the warming. Or you can put iron on the ocean to drive more photosynthesis and draw down carbon, and they capture carbon from the atmosphere and sequester it somewhere. And in fact, it's being done at some scales to drive more fossil fuel out of the ground. Okay, so people of faith are now beginning to worry about this in both the unintended consequence sense as well as the religious sense. Okay, it's one thing to worry about whether we have dominion over the planet and other species, or we should be stewards, but it is another thing to do geoengineering to modify planetary climate, right? They think we are beginning to play God. So multi-faith responses to the prospect of climate engineering, a green faith report. So here again, religion is coming in saying, are we even allowed to do this under our religious mores, religious rules, constraints, laws, whatever you want to think about? Okay. As examples, responding to climate change locally, religious communities in many parts of the world are responding to particular challenges of climate change. And for example, the Higher Ground initiative of Temple Solel, a Jewish synagogue in Hollywood, Florida, is confronting the problem of rising seas. We already talked about the Moroccan mosques, for example, several thousand of them. Members of the synagogue educated themselves on sea level rise, investigated local areas that flood during very high spring tides called king tides, took action to bring attention to the issue, made efforts to reduce their synagogue's carbon footprint, and expanded their initiative to other Reform Jewish congregations. Okay, so there are many such efforts. You can see the list here. Interfaith Power and Light leads religious communities' effort to improve energy efficiency and conservation in the United States. Okay, how specific is that? So religion is really going out far into playing a role in climate solutions. So here are many examples. The Shalom Center of Philadelphia, Eco Justice Ministries with a range of Christian denominations in the United States on greening churches, taking on action on climate change, and transformational ministry. Okay, Earth Ministry, Green Church, Green Faith, and interreligious eco-justice. Not only the word climate change is completely into the system now, but also these additional sense of bringing religious values, eco-justice. That's a beautiful word, right? Faithful advocacy on environmental issues in Washington State, where the organization is based. So religion being used to drive climate change solution. Okay, the second key strategy is integrating solutions, energy and technology. So renewable energies are obviously big. The part of the portfolio of energy production, renewable energies are growing, but not as fast as they should or they could or they may grow in the future. Right now, China, Germany, India, and so on are making heavy investments, but not so much in the US. So only individual photovoltaics and solar thermals and so on. So, but in the meantime, this is the some tribe stand with the standing rock, defend the sacred. You can again see we are here to protect water is life, okay, and so on. So again, this is enlightened self-interest of protecting what you love. Okay, that's essentially relates to integrating energy and technology with religion and the understanding. Technology transfer and efficiency, it goes together with what are forward-looking, backward-looking, and back and forward-looking issues. So you have climate justice on the top with distributive justice that we just talked about, compensatory justice, transitional and procedural. We won't go into the details, but there is technology which worries about access, use, and innovation, finance, and capacity building. The point here is if a country like US is let's say responsible historically for a lot of the emissions, and the US is good at innovating solutions, green technology, a replacement for HFCs, hybrid cars, and so on. How eager will they be to transfer this technology? How efficiently will they do it? How will they do the capacity building in terms of implementation of technology? So that goes to, again, identifying climate change as a moral, ethical, and climate justice issue with differentiated responsibilities and disparate impacts. Right? So what are the key institutions and mechanisms? Technology mechanism is actually written into the Paris Agreement. In 2010, the COP established the technology mechanism with the objective of accelerating and enhancing climate technology development and transfer. It consists of two complementary bodies that work together, the Technology Executive Committee and the Climate Technology Center and Network. The mechanism will also serve the Paris Agreement. Okay, so maybe I should, let me finish that. There are other mechanisms evolving, like the Sustainable Development Goals under the UN. It used to be the Millennium targets or so, and there are other frameworks evolving, like the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which talk about reducing mortality and population affected, economic loss, and damage to critical infrastructure and basic services, and increasing countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies, international cooperation, availability and access to multi-hazard early warning systems, and disaster risk reduction information and assessments. So this is not technology, but this is information transfer. Okay, for example, India has invested many million, almost $100 million in weather and climate prediction, and India is training people in the region all the way to Africa, in Asia and Africa, to use the seasonal predictions and also operational ocean forecasting issued by the Indian agencies. So this is technology transfer, but also information transfer. Countries who can afford to do it will do it, and since they do it globally or at the scale of the regional ocean and land or continent anyways, they can train the people and transfer this information. Okay?